I'm Pastor Matt.
And I'm Mary Rose.
And welcome back to our podcast, Reading Through Scripture. We are in Exodus chapter 32. The people have bowed down and worshiped to a golden calf and gotten ready to have a festival to the Lord. And Moses has made a petition before God, and now he's about to come down the mountain back to the people. And we're picking it up at verse 15 in Exodus 32.
Moses turned and went down the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. The tablets were the work of God. The writing was the writing of God, engraved on the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting, he said to Moses, "There is the sound of war in the camp." Moses replied, "It is not the sound of victory. It is not the sound of defeat. It is the sound of singing that I hear." When Moses approached the camp and saw the calf and dancing, his anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hands, breaking them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. And he took the calf the people had made and burned it in the fire. Then he ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it.
So, first of all, Moses starts coming down, and I often forget that detail, that Joshua has gone up at least part of the way with Moses. And that shouldn't surprise me, because we hear in other places that Joshua has gone in with Moses to the place like the tent of meeting and is often in God's presence. That's part of what prepares him for the role he's going to take on later. So we shouldn't be surprised by that. But Moses comes down and meets him, and Joshua hasn't heard what Yahweh has told Moses, that they've prostituted themselves out to these other gods, and obviously he's not down in the camp, so he doesn't know what has happened with Aaron and them. So he hears the clamor, and his immediate response is, "Oh no, someone's attacked us." And so it's interesting that it clarifies that Moses says, "What I hear is in fact sounds of celebration," which goes back with the end of verse 6, where it says the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play, right? Sounds of celebration, of joy. They think they're doing this great thing. But it's not, in fact, good at all. So Moses goes down, and it's interesting that as Moses sees this, he begins to get super angry. At least I think that's kind of interesting, because he's already been told about it by God. And then his response was, "Lord, have compassion. Lord, don't forget your own name." Lord, like, he brings all this focus back of, like, pleading for the people. But as soon as he gets down and sees it, he is none too pleased.
No.
And, maybe it's a difference between, like, hearing the report of something bad happening and actually seeing it with your own eyes.
Sure.
Moses seems pretty angry, and obviously it describes his anger as burning hot. And he throws the tablets out of his hands and breaks them at the foot of the mountain. So some of that might be a response to his outrage, but I think there's also something else going on here, because what has happened, we talked about this before, the people of Israel, through their idolatry, have now broken the covenant they've made. So these stones were symbolic of the covenant, right? They're the testimony of this kind of covenant God has with the people. And so as Moses gets down there and sees the idol and the idolatry and the false worship, yes, he's angry. He's also shattering them, I think, to show that, like, the relationship with God has been broken by this.
Why are the 10 Commandments a symbol of the covenant?
Because they're part of, like, what God has had them write down, that we're going to go in the ark, that they've already been told they were supposed to go in there, as, like, a sign of, like, obedience in the relationship.
Okay.
And remember, like I said, I think by the end of chapter 34, something has fundamentally changed in the covenant. Because up to this point, it's still, at least the language in Exodus from chapter 19 through this section at least, seems to have this conditional point to the covenant. You do this, I will do this. Or I've done this, now you do this, and you're part of the covenant. And they haven't done it, and so it's fractured. So God has to do something fundamentally different.
Sure.
And so I think it's symbolizing, like, that has been broken, and broken immediately. Which, if we, as we've been talking about throughout, that Exodus is kind of a mirroring of the beginning of Genesis. This like new creation kind of thing, right? With the new creation of the tabernacle and all those things. What happens beginning of Genesis 3?
The fall?
Fall into sin. So the covenant is broken. And immediately, it's not just like a gradual descent into sin. What's the first story outside of the garden?
Cain and Abel?
It
Murder?
It is. It's fratricide is the fancy word for that. And he's killing his own brother. And so, kind of similar to that fall, almost immediately after God gives these blessings to Adam and Eve, is now mirrored again in the people of Israel, where it's supposed to be a new beginning. And there's this fall into sin almost immediately. And maybe, I don't know how familiar you are with the story of Noah, but after Noah comes out of the ark, right? What happens with Noah and the grapes? He almost immediately makes a bunch of wine and like blacks out drunk.
Okay, yeah.
And then his son comes in and sees his nakedness, and it's a whole thing of shame, which is why one of the people groups gets condemned of the three sons of Noah. And so, like, even there, with each time there's a new covenant, it seems like there's almost immediately sin and brokenness and people not really fulfilling it. And so I think this is meant to kind of be seen again in that pattern. And we hinted at the connections between Moses and Noah before with the basket and the ark and kind of this new covenant language and a fresh start and all these things. So all of those kind of we've had like 3 mirrors where this happens, where if God tries to restart with people, we're going to screw it up every time. So it's this pattern that kind of a hint that something different is going to have to come. A different way of making things new and better, and it can't be just like that our hearts are set right and like, oh, I'll wipe clean the past and now you guys live fine and you'll do it. We won't. And so something greater is already being showed here, like needs to take place. That last verse, what do you make of verse 20?
I mean, it's kind of intense.
It's a weird story.
Yeah.
Right? Like, why does he grind it down, like burn it, grind it down, and put it on the water and make people drink it? There's a lot of speculation. A lot of it I don't think is very helpful or edifying. But I think one possible reason for this and connection, I think, is it could be connected to Numbers chapter 5, which is where a woman who's suspected of adultery, right, of being unfaithful, is made to drink pure water and dust from the tabernacle in order to determine her guilt or innocence. It's a weird part of Numbers. And even though Exodus 32 does not draw on that ceremony exactly, there is certainly a sense in which Israel has committed spiritual adultery, right?
Sure.
And so this is a sign that, like, they're being judged. That's one way to take it. I don't know. Someone else is trying to say, like, oh, with what we're going to read in just a minute, where 3,000 turn themselves to the Lord and strike down their brothers, and we'll read that in a minute, that like it correlates that only a few of them were guilty or not guilty of all of this. I think that's saying way too much and more than the text is saying, because it kind of sounds like all Israel rose up to do this idol worship. So I wouldn't try to limit it and say like, oh, only the guilty people are those who are killed. The rest of them weren't really into it, which is what some people would say. But I think maybe this ceremony has to do with like that sense of bringing judgment upon themselves. And we know from later in the scriptures that this whole generation, aside from Joshua and Caleb, will not enter into the promised land. They'll all die in the wilderness that are 20 years and older at this point.
Right. What about, like, the fact that the idol had to be, like, burned up and consumed? Like, almost similar to, like, the actual offerings that were given to God. Like...
Yeah, there could be something to that. And I think, if nothing else, if you're burning the idol and throwing it on the water and having people drink it, you're kind of saying this is worthless and empty right? It's showing that it's literally nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think more about.
Well, and didn't they give their own jewelry and the gold earrings of your wives and daughters? Like, they gave their I don't know,
precious
metals. Precious. I was gonna say priceless, not priceless. They gave their precious items to make this idol, and so it's kind of I don't know, if you don't get it back, you're gonna I'm almost thinking about parenting little children and this is gone now for you.
Yeah, I mean, and that could be it too. Yeah, that's one of those verses that there's a lot of speculation and no clear explanation of exactly what's going on here. He does it in anger. It seems like, in some ways, a sense of judgment on them, obviously, and certainly on the idol itself. But what more to make of that, I don't really know. You want to pick it up at verse 21?
He said to Aaron, "What did these people do to you, that you led them into such great sin?" "Do not be angry, my lord," Aaron said. "You know how prone these people are to evil. They said to me, 'Make us gods who will go before us.' As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. So I told them, 'Whoever has any gold jewelry, take it off.' Then they gave me the gold, and I threw it in the fire, and out came this calf."
Yeah, now just the lamest excuse I have ever heard. Man, I was thinking about just whenever you're a kid, right? When we do something we know we shouldn't have, and we make up excuses, and parents don't always call you out on it, but sometimes they've got to know.
Yeah.
I think back to when I was a kid, I'm some of the excuses I had for my own behavior were just completely ludicrous and stupid, and certainly not believable by anyone with any amount of reason or knowledge of humanity. This has got to be another one of those cases. And it's funny because, as maybe not funny isn't the right word, but Aaron, in response to the anxious complaint, right, of the people, right, who will fix us, or this problem is absent, and he spent too much time with God, rather than seeing this complaint from the people as longing for God, right, wanting his presence, which is really what it is, which is what I think all complaining is ultimately about. When we're talking about, maybe not all complaining, but a lot of it is we want God to act, right? If we're complaining, we want something to come about for us. And Aaron attempted to make the complaint go away by giving the people what they wanted. He gave them an idol.
Sure.
Instead, and this was, to them, it seems like the golden calf was a more familiar and predictable image of God, what they had experienced in Egypt, like we had talked about before. And so when Aaron heard the people's cries, he must have thought he knew how to, quote unquote, help Moses and God by taking care of the problem for them. Oh, I'll give something that solves the problem so they don't have to deal with it, right? At least that's, if I'm being gracious to the logic for what Aaron might have done. And so he's giving the complainers what they wanted. And when Moses confronts the people, he's severe in his words of judgment to them. He lambasts the people. And he is pretty angry with Aaron. But when Moses confronts God, and we already saw that once, and he'll do it a couple more times, it was only to uphold the covenant claims of love and forgive and to carry the people even though they suck. Kind of like the same for us, right? And so I think I mentioned this last time, but Moses seems more committed to the covenant between the people and God than to the expressed needs of the people or even his own anger. He's more committed to the covenant and the relationship between God and the people, which is what he should be, I think.
That's an interesting take when he just broke what you called a symbol of the covenant.
Yes, but I think it's saying that the covenant in effect has been broken. So that he's going to go up again. He's going to have a couple more speeches with God and basically begs, I don't want to say cajoles because that's the wrong word, but appeals to God to not forsake the people despite their rejection of God, to find a way to continue to be faithful and uphold it. So he's fully acknowledging what has been shattered. He's not in denial. He's not lying about the sin. Moses doesn't make excuses to God for the sins of the people. He just appeals to God to keep his promises. So, again, in this situation in verse 22, Aaron is clearly trying to put the blame on the people, right, rather than himself.
Sure.
So which is what we all do when we're sinning, right? When we've sinned, we make every excuse under the sun for why it wasn't our fault. Sin is, in our own minds, is never our own fault. We blame our circumstances. We blame the other people around us. Sometimes we even blame God, which again, Genesis 3, right? Adam blames Eve. Eve blames the serpent, right? It's everyone else's fault but their own for their decisions. And so we always try to put the blame and push the sin onto everyone else. I heard this analogy just the other day, and maybe you grew up hearing this analogy, because I didn't grow up in Tornado Alley.
Oh.
But have you heard Aaron's excuse sounds like how we would use like the taco analogy for tornadoes? Have you heard that analogy before?
Yes, I have heard that before.
So, hey, what's the analogy?
So, like, a tornado watch is like when you have all of the components you need for a tornado, but they're not all in motion. So, like, with a taco, it's like you have lettuce and tomato and ground beef and cheese and shells, and like it's all in your fridge and your pantry, but like there are no tacos present. Whereas a tornado warning is like all of the components are together and there is a taco.
Sure. So it kind of sounds like Aaron saying, look, all the ingredients were here, and out came this taco, out came this item. I don't know how it happened. They were there, and now this thing has happened. And it's so, again, he's saying, like, how could I have stopped it? It was all already going to happen anyways. And so he's just, again, pushing the blame onto everything else and onto everyone else.
I think it's interesting how Aaron can, I would say pretty much tell the truth, but at the same time point a finger. You know, like I think that's like an interesting like nuance for us to like consider, that like what he says is basically true. Maybe not the out came the calf part, but like everything else is what happened. But he told it in a spun way that would take the blame off him. And that's still deceptive. And I think it kind of goes back to what you were saying about how like we all do this. Like I can think of many times in my life where I have tried to put a spin on things so that I look better. And even if it's not exactly untrue, it's definitely not
an honest framing,
an accurate account of all things.
Sure. So we leave out pertinent details so that we take as little blame as possible.
Yeah.
And as we think about just media, and especially when people in different political parties or people with different agendas will spin some of the stories and frame it with certain phrases or certain ways of talking about things that imply or don't imply different things. And we can often do this, like you said, where we're saying the truth, but we're implying or putting a worse construction on others or the best construction on ourselves at the expense of others. And yeah, I think you're right. Aaron is doing that very thing here, and that comes at a high cost, right? And it harms the relationship, and I think it harms some of his own credibility. It's got to. Why don't we pick it up at verse 25?
Moses saw that the people were running wild, and that Aaron had let them get out of control, and so become a laughingstock to their enemies. So he stood at the entrance to the camp and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the Levites rallied to him. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Each man strap a sword to his side. Go back and forth throughout the camp, from one end to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor." The Levites did as Moses commanded, and that day about 3,000 of the people died. Then Moses said, "You have been set apart to the Lord today, for you were against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day."
First of all, looking at verses 25 and 26, the point of these verses, while the exact meaning is a little unclear, we don't exactly know how it is that they in verse 25, it says, Aaron let them break loose to the derision of their enemies. Or what does yours say?
Aaron let them get out of control and so become a laughing stock to their enemies.
So I think it kind of shows just by the differences in our translations what exactly it means of how they're being viewed by the enemies and the impact it has isn't exactly clear. So maybe a laughing stock, maybe to be held in scorn, maybe to be looked down upon. We're not exactly sure.
Okay.
But what is clear is that their idolatry had a public impact before others.
Sure.
Right? It had an impact on how certainly those people would have viewed God. And I think that's a really humbling thing for us as Christians. We're not going to we're not going to live out our faith perfectly. But I think we need to take the fact that our actions, our words, the things we take a stand on, or what we say or don't say publicly, has an impact on how others view, obviously it's not the nation of Israel, but the church and Christianity. It's when we say we believe things and we don't live according to those, it has an impact.
Sure.
And not only that, but when we also do the thing that Aaron then does and make excuses instead of owning that we haven't done what we should have done, and just like saying, you know what, I don't measure up to the standard that I'm saying I'm trying to follow. That actually also continues to hinder. If we admit it, like, we're not the Savior, so it's okay for us to say, like, hey, I'm trying and I failed. When we try to make excuses for it, that actually, I think, hurts our witness more than just saying, actually, I'm a sinner in need of grace, and this isn't what I should have done.
Well, and who among us has not sinned once and then it led to another and another and another, and before you know it, things are out of control. Like, that's what sin does. Sin leads to chaos. Exactly.
And it seems to be, as the focus is on Israel, that here what's happening in their own camp is leading to the derision or the laughing, the laughter of those outside, to mock their faith, to mock them as a nation, to think less of God, when the whole point of God calling them is so that he might be known to the nations. And so they've hindered their own part in the mission.
Right.
And there's a parallel, again, I've already kind of brought it up, between the golden calf in Exodus 32 and the fall in Genesis 3. Because there's a word play in Hebrew between the nakedness of man and woman after eating the fruit, right, in Genesis 3.
Okay.
And Israel's running wild after the incident of the golden calf. So like there's a word play of kind of how they're being exposed and shamed now before others. So just again, another hint that how we should view this in light of the previous story, which we talk all the time about how we should read parts of a text in context.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes we forget that Genesis through Deuteronomy is really one book.
Sure.
It's all this account of like the beginnings of Moses, like up to the edge of the promised land. And now, to be sure, we could also include it with the rest of Scripture, but those 5 in particular are seen as just kind of one unit, and they're separated as scrolls because each book is about the length you can do reasonably for a scroll at that time with integrity.
I didn't know that.
And so you might have a few that are a little bit longer. I think Leviticus could fit. You fit a little more after, but you don't. It's a natural breaking point when you get to the part of Numbers. And so they're about the length that the scrolls could be and still be on one scroll. So there you go.
Interesting. All right, are we going to talk about the 3,000 killing?
We can, yeah. Hold
What
on.
are we supposed to do with that?
So, I mean, I think this shows, in a sense, that all sin has a consequence. And, I've talked about this before. It's Luke 13, where the people start asking Jesus, were these people condemned? Did the tower fall on them because they were bad people or whatever? Jesus says, no. Do you think that they were worse sinners than anyone else? No, but take stock lest this happens to you. And so often we hear a story like this where someone is, particularly in Exodus and then in Numbers, where the plagues come on the people in the wilderness and like 10,000 die and 7,000 die and 3,000 die and all these things. And we're like, man, I can't imagine that. But the reality is that whether it comes sooner or later, all of us die as a result of sin.
Right.
At least in this physical body. We're going to face that first death. And so I think part of this is showing the seriousness of the cost of sin. So was it exactly 3,000? Probably not. It was probably some sort of rounded number.
Sure.
Why it stopped there, don't know. Maybe the other people repented after. It doesn't say that.
Also, is it really only the Levites that would say they are for the Lord?
At least initially, it seems like it. I'm going to take that at face value.
I just wondered if it meant more along the lines of, the Levites were, set apart for the Lord. If he was just calling the Levites by saying those who are for the Lord, were they called that, the ones for the Lord?
No, I think, and this is kind of what the text implies, is that they respond to Moses' call here. And that's part of what now sets them apart as this tribe to minister in the tabernacle later, is because they responded at that moment immediately with repentance, and the rest did not. So, again, that sounds like the Levites were also involved in it, in the idol worship, right? Sure. It doesn't sound like they've avoided, we were the people looking down and going, you shouldn't be doing this, and now responded. It's, they hear the law preached, and they respond with contrition and go, we'll do what the Lord commands, whereas the rest do not respond. And this parallels a story later in Scripture. So it's probably a story you've heard a number of times. Elijah at the base of the mountain, when there's the theoretical worship battle, essentially, between him and the prophets of Baal, right? Yeah. And so it's in 1 Kings 18. And when Moses calls out, whoever's on the Lord's side, come to me. That's the same thing that Elijah essentially says. If you're for the Lord, decide today. And when they do, what happens with those who decide they're for the Lord's side after God has responded by burning up Elijah's sacrifice? You remember?
They're saved?
They turn and they slaughter all the prophets of Baal and of Ashtoreth who are there. Oh, yeah. So the idol worship, they turn and they condemn them. And so it's essentially the same thing, right? So both are a call back to allegiance to the Lord. Stop being wavering and hedging between the two sides and respond. And so, aside from those few Levites, it seems as though most doubled down on their idolatry. So why don't all of them die? Don't know. I mean, they all do eventually, like we talked about. But these punishments, I think, reveal the true cost of sin, whether immediately or ultimately in the long term, apart from Christ, is condemnation. I think that's kind of the best way I've got to think through this passage and what's going on here. But I do think there's another passage that this brings to mind for me. And so Jesus in the Gospels says, you cannot be my follower. Were you thinking about this?
I was thinking about this.
So what's the passage?
Well, he says, unless you give up your mother, your father, your brother, and come follow me.
Unless you hate your brother or your mother or your father. Yeah. You have to hate them. Yeah. Otherwise, you cannot be my follower. So what was the connection you were going to make with this then?
Well, because he says you've been set apart by the Lord because you were against your sons and brothers. And so he's blessed you. Yeah.
So, again, I think...
it's really about, allegiance, right?
It's not that God actually wants us to hate our family members. Right. But here in this case, and we see in the laws of other parts of the Pentateuch, that when a child or a parent begins to worship a false god, the command upon Israel is to have a couple of witnesses to it and then to stone them to death for blasphemy, for false idol worship. Because if you let it go at all, it'll infest the whole community, which is a wild place to live in. Well, when you read that command, and granted, we're not under the Old Testament law anymore. Sure. But in a culture where for the majority of history, whole countries were by and large one faith, right? Mm-hmm. As the leader went, so the country was, right? Yeah. That's why you still have a lot of places in Europe a national religion, even though it may not be quite as stringent as it used to be.
Sure.
But like, we live in a country where it's like, you do you. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, so how do I live in the midst of that? Mm-hmm. And that's really challenging.
Yeah.
Because obviously we can't stone anyone in our community who blasphemes God, or we'd be in prison,
right.
or we'd be on a killing spree.
Right.
And then in prison. Which, rightly so, we shouldn't do that. But right. It's just interesting how seriously it's taken. And I think that should give us pause for how seriously we consider the need for us as parents and as members of the church to make sure that we know what we really believe and that we're teaching our kids and not just hoping they figure it out.
Yes, while we won't, stone our children, we do need to take seriously the task we've been given to teach them the faith.
And especially to teach them when they're going to be in a culture with so many other competing stories that say things that aren't true.
Yeah.
It's our job not to necessarily shelter them from everything, but to help them learn how to navigate it. Mm-hmm. Because if you try to shelter them when they're little, then when they get older and are exposed to it, which they inevitably will be,
right.
they won't know what to do with it. And so our responsibility has to be how to train and equip them. And so we've talked about before, but I think this is in verse kind of 29, is in part where a change happens in how God is going to interact with the people. Because now there's another group. Instead of it just being the firstborn of each family, now there's a particular tribe set apart to have this responsibility that later we'll see means they have all the dealings in the tabernacle and with the temple. And obviously, while it's of Aaron's line, Aaron is a Levite. So like the high priesthood and the whole priesthood comes out of the tribe of Levi, as do all of the extended people who are singers and people who care for the offerings and are guards in the temple, and all of those things are now assigned to a particular tribe instead of to the firstborn of each family. And we see that this changes the nature of what Levi is going to inherit as well as a tribe. Because the Levites are the only ones who don't inherit a particular portion or section of the promised land. They're not given a section. They're in all the towns, and they're to be provided for from everyone else. So they don't have a particular inheritance. They live in the midst of everyone, and then they go to serve in the temple. So just again, interesting shifts that have happened in this section, in this text. You want to read the rest of the chapter?
Beginning in verse 30. The next day Moses said to the people, "You have committed a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." So Moses went back to the Lord and said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now, please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me out of the book you have written." The Lord replied to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. Now go, lead the people to the place I spoke of, and my angel will go before you. However, when the time comes for me to punish, I will punish them for their sin." And the Lord struck the people with a plague because of what they did with the calf Aaron had made.
So not only did the 3,000 die, but now a plague has come upon them on top of that. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. This is just like a powerful section. Like I talked about, 32 through 34 really is highlighting Moses as mediator.
Sure.
And what do you notice about kind of this section with Moses' dialogue and his request and God's response?
I mean, Moses gets a little bit like ultimatum-y with God.
Okay.
Like, forgive them, and like, if you won't forgive them, like, I'm done with this, right? Like, isn't that kind of what he's saying? Like, blot me out of the book you have written?
I'm saying, so I'm going to take this more graciously than that.
Okay.
I'm going to take it as Moses saying, tie my fate up with them.
Oh.
If you won't accept them, like have me in their place or let me go with them, which is also why, and I think you had this written as well, where he said to the people in verse 30, perhaps I can make atonement for your sin.
Sure.
So Moses then essentially offers himself to make atonement. But God does not accept it. God does not accept Moses in that role of mediator to make atonement for sin.
But is he really offering himself when, like, he offers it if God won't forgive the sin?
I'm taking it as like...
Like, if he just won't forgive the sin out of being merciful and remembering his promises, then maybe you'll forgive it if I sacrifice myself?
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
And so I would take that, one, this clearly foreshadows somebody.
Sure.
Jesus,
Christ,
right?
Yeah.
Obviously. But I think we also hear a similar argument or a similar point being made by Paul in Romans 9 through 11. When he says, if I could, I would offer my own life, my own condemnation, that the people of Israel might come to faith. So Paul, Moses, try to take, at least in some sense, this role of mediation on to bring the people and restore the people to God, which they don't need to because that's what Christ is going to do. But I think if in Deuteronomy 18 we hear that another prophet like Moses is going to arise that the people should listen to, it's one of the messianic prophecies, that also includes that Jesus is going to be one who not only brings clarity and reveals God, who sees God face to face, also takes up the role of mediator and deliverer. And here Moses has tried to, but someone greater than Moses is going to come who can actually do it. And so this is not often talked about as like a messianic prophecy or a thing pointing forward, but I think it is one. Maybe not a prophecy per se, but it certainly is a type that points us forward to Jesus, that God won't accept it here, but still ultimately, to a degree, forgives sins. Because he doesn't cast them off entirely.
I feel like it's very interesting word choice, and maybe you know more about the Hebrew here, but just the phrase blot me out of the book you have written is interesting to me because, one, like, what they have that God has written is sent through Moses, right? We have the 10 Commandments that are written by God, and Moses is the one that brings them. And then we usually attribute these books of the Bible to Moses, who is, would mean he's tasked with writing God's story, the whole beginning of God on earth, right? God creation, like that's all attributed to Moses. So the fact that the words here are not like, please forgive their sin, but if not, then accept me as a sacrifice, or then kill me, or let me receive the judgment with them, but that it's blot me out of the book you have written. Like, I just think that's interesting because Moses, if Moses really did write these books, like, he must perceive himself as both author and character. I mean, of course, author, loosely.
Sure. The one who's physically penning them down.
Yes, or chipping them in, however they wrote on the scrolls, right? On papyrus, yeah. So I just think it's interesting word choice. I just wonder if that's really the words used in Hebrew.
It is. The question is, what's the book it's referring to? We could think that it's this book, like these books that the story that Moses is now inhabiting, if you will. The other option is to think of it as the book of life. So to condemn me. So if you won't accept this, then like put me into the book of condemnation rather than the book of eternal life.
But we haven't really had those words yet.
No. What's the referentative book there? Like that's the question, right?
Sure. Well, that's what kind of my point.
Yeah.
Because I think it's interesting if he really is the writer of the first 5 books, then it's interesting word choice.
It is. And I don't know the Hebrew enough of the Hebrew off the top of my head. I think it's pretty. The words are pretty simple and clear to say like the book or they probably would have used the word book because book doesn't really, you don't have books, so you have codexes, which is like, what, 500 AD before you have like the first codex?
I don't know.
Otherwise it's scrolls, but you might refer to it as like this writing or this book, so it would be something like that.
And God's reply is interesting too. Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, that's everyone. Everyone has sinned against God.
Well, yeah, and that's why,
like that, it sounds like such harsh judgment, but he still sends his angel out ahead of them.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. And we'll see the people's response to this next time. We're not going to have time today because I think it's interesting how the people respond to that word from God. Because he doesn't say he'll go with them anymore. He says, my angel will go. So the implication appears to be that his presence is not going to go with them anymore. He'll bring them to the place he's promised, but he's not going to actively go with them. We'll talk more about that next time because I think we're going to have to wrap up there unless you've got any last thoughts.
No.
All right. So we will pick it up in chapter 33 next week.